you want to be translated? Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this afternoon's session, which is officially called Google News Initiative, a conversation about news with Madhav Chinnappa. Unofficially, according to most of you, as I've been talking to you over the last couple of days, it's called Grill Google. So I'll do my best to start grilling Madhav for about half an hour or so, and then I'll open it up to questions from the room. So Madhav, as most of you know, has been in news for many years, since 1994, has been at Google since 2010, and is familiar to many in the news industry as having been the lead on DNI for the last few years. So oddly, as I've been preparing for this session, there's been very little written in the news about Google because the oxygen has been sucked out of the room by somebody else. So we're going to get rid of the elephant in the room to start with. And so I'm sorry to start with a not Google question, Madhav, but you knew I was going to do it. The events of the last few weeks, of the last couple of days of Zuckerberg's testimony in the US, how has that been felt in Google, and what's been the blowback?
Well, I think it's fair to say the elephant in the room has also been charging up and down Perugia, all around lots of different places. I think it goes to a point that I made on actually an earlier panel, which is that it shows the difference between the different technology companies, and it's definitely had an effect on us. I mean, the issues that people are talking about, that this brings up, about privacy and security and responsibility, we think about them all the time. It also shows that people have different responsibilities because they have different business models and different approaches. So we're very cognizant of those issues, and we think we've been trying to do a lot of work on that for a fair few years now. We saw in the testimonies a lot of confusion, frankly, around how data is used and privacy and the like. I don't know if it was by chance or not, but on Tuesday on my way here, I got my little Google check your privacy pop-up. How many people actually do it? How many people care? Or is it something that journalists care very much about, but actually the greater wide world doesn't? I think just so everybody knows what we're talking about the privacy reminder that you get when you go onto to Google, and we've been doing that for, again, a number of years now, and literally hundreds of millions of people have gone and checked their My Account. I mean, the most common response I personally get, and this is anecdotes, not data, is people are like, why are you bugging me about that again? But there are good reasons, and hundreds of millions of people check My Account. We've tried to make it as simple as possible, and going back to that principle that we have at Google, which is that the user controls the data. So you can go in and you can check it, you can delete it, you can edit it down, other things like that. And we've tried to make it as easy as possible. Right now, if you go in, you just have to click the picture of yourself, and you will be taken to the My Account section. So that's something we've been doing, again, for a number of years now, because we believe in that the importance of the user.
The Cambridge Analytica story has maybe come as more of a surprise to the wider world than to people in tech, as data flows around and is a very valuable asset. But how confident are you at Google, and what action has been, or conversations have been had inside, to make sure that there isn't something like a Cambridge Analytica lurking in Google?
Yeah, as I said, we take user security and privacy incredibly seriously, and have done from the beginning days of Google. And there are entire swathes of engineers who are there to make sure that the security and the privacy is protected, because from a Google perspective, switching away from Google is incredibly easy, right? You can use any other search engine with one click, and so we have to work infinitely harder to make sure that we keep that trust of the user.
People don't, though. 87% of search is through Google, so you still have pretty much a monopoly on it.
Well, I think that's because we try to provide a good product to the user, but the moment that we don't, I mean, I remember in the beginning days of search, it was Yahoo was the one that, and one of my bosses, Richard Gingras, talked about the fact he used to run like the number 3 search engine, and no one ever thought that Yahoo would ever get knocked off the top. And guess what, it did. So these things change a lot faster than people realize.
You have spoken already here and in private conversations, I'm sure, to many of these people here in this room, about how Google isn't Facebook. You have a different model, it is a different sort of company, etc. But one of the interesting things I found as I've been speaking to colleagues and friends in Perugia
is that there seems to be a lot of anger and frustration generally sent towards the tech companies as a whole. I think this morning on your panel, it was termed a sort of dystopian view of tech. So you do get lumped in anyway, whatever you want or whatever the realities of business models. Why do you feel that is, and what do you think Google and within the Google News Initiative can actually do about that?
Well, I think my personal view is there are different reasons behind that. I think, if you talk about dystopia in general, we were talking beforehand, right? I think it's a natural human thing about dystopia. There's been literature from the beginning of literature that's always been about dystopian views. I think where that kind of angst has been in the news industry, it's actually what Alan Rusbridger was talking about, the panel that I was on before for any of you that were there, and he was talking about how it was, quote unquote, much easier, pre-digital essentially, pre-internet, to be a journalist, and that you had so much more power, and as he talked about, we were up here and people were down there, and what's happened, I think, with digital and the internet is it has changed the roles and the power balance, I think, between news organizations. And I think the reality is that the power has moved from news organizations to the user. And the user now has much more choice and access to information than they've ever had before. And to almost amplify that, everything is trying to get the user's attention. It's not just, in the olden days of newspapers competing with newspapers and, TV with TV. It's now everyone is competing with everyone else. And, my joke, which is now out of date, was that Angry Bird seems to be winning, right? Because that was how old this joke is. And so I think what we're seeing there is that change of the power balance that's going to the user. And that is very, very disruptive. And I think what we've tried to do at Google, starting with DNI and now with GNI, is to create a dialogue with the industry around the issues that are important to them, and to work now through products, through partnerships, and through programs about being trying to help with the sustainability of the news ecosystem overall. And I think the one thing, if you only remember one thing from this talk, apart from my bad Angry Birds joke, I would say is that what we're trying to achieve is a dialogue so that we can work together. And that's what the spirit of DNI and the spirit of GNI is.
You say that the power has moved from the editor to the user. I think part of the anger that is felt in the industry is that it feels like the power has transferred from the newsroom to the tech company. And so I suppose the tech company is trying to serve the user, but kind of maybe it's naive of us to think that it's the tech company's fault rather than it being the user at the other end.
Yeah, I don't think fault gets one anywhere. I think you need to kind of look at the situation and analyze it, because again, my point about the tech companies being different, I think that what Google does as a search engine, what Facebook and Twitter do as social networks, what Apple does as a controlled operating system, and Amazon does as a fantastic shopping portal, those are very, very different things, right? And in the end, what's happened is that they're providing services to the user, and those are good things, but the user are the ones who gets to choose, right? They get to choose what they're doing. So that's why, in my analysis, and this is not just because I work for Google, it's that the users got that much more control. We have more control than we've ever had as humans, right, in terms of access to information, especially because of this thing, right? It's always in our pocket, or at least close by. Or if you're Jeff Jarvis, if it's not close by, you get really nervous.
This morning you were talking about dialogue, and you were just mentioning having a dialogue between tech companies and publishers. And Alan Rusbridger made the interesting point that maybe you need other voices within the tech companies, so ethicists and philosophers and social scientists. You sit as a journalist within Google. Can you share with us some of the conversations that you have had which maybe have surprised the engineers, or that you think, crikey, well, that would never have even been an issue in a newsroom?
Well, I think I can answer that in a slightly strange way. One is, I think what's happened, at least at Google, in my 7 years at Google, is there have been more people who have a news background coming into the organization. And I mentioned Richard Gingras, who's one of many people and has been spearheading a lot of what we do. And that brings just a different range of experience. And I think, in terms of the kind of conversations that we had, I'll give you an example through DNI. You know, it was probably about 3 years ago now when we started DNI, and we were talking with the publishers about what are the big challenges, right? So what we said to them was, please don't tell us what to do. Tell us what the challenges are so that we can try and collaborate together and see if there is areas that we can work together. And at the time, one of the big things was mobile. And everyone was freaked out because everyone was going onto mobile. And what happened was all the platforms were saying, you know, give us a feed of your content if you're a news publisher. And it was, you know, Facebook Instant Articles and Snapchat Discover and, you know, Apple News and even Google Play Newsstand, right? And the publishers came to us and said, look, that's really getting confusing for us. Can you help? So the engineers diagnosed this, and they said, well, the problem is the mobile web is too slow. And once they realized that, they said, well, this is not something Google can solve. This is an ecosystem issue. And then through dialogue, we developed, helped develop AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages, which is an open source form of HTML. And what I found really interesting about that process was a few things. Firstly, when we came back into the working group and came up with the concept of, or when Bez, the engineer, came back and said, you know, this is what we're thinking about to help with that, one of the folks said, well, I thought you'd come up with your version of Instant Articles. And they were like, well, that wouldn't solve the problem, right? I think the other thing from a Google perspective that was really interesting is that this dialogue approach was different and has been different from the experience I'd had beforehand. Because beforehand, product development at Google was very much a black box, right? And you'd find out about it when it was shipped, sometimes just afterwards, right? And this was kind of different, and I'll be honest with you, it was new in terms of a way of working. But AMP, I think in particular, has been such a success for the open web, which is good for, I think, all of us, but also good for Google. The engineers are like, well, this approach, this dialogue approach, actually can be really effective. And we've tried to do that more with other things like the YouTube player for publishers, like the subscription stuff. So that's actually, that dialogue and that cultural approach has changed a bit, which I think is good.
So let's move on to DNI, where you've had a lot of dialogue, and Ludo's team have probably spoken to more journalists than most journalists. Looking back over the last 4 rounds, and you've got the 5th soon to close, what grade would you give yourself so far?
I don't know. I don't think it's for us to grade. I think it's for everybody in the audience to grade. That's the easy question. We've just closed, by the way, round 5. I closed it on Monday. And I can break some news if it's news. We had 719 applications, which is higher than round 4. And in round 4 and 5, we focused on monetization, and in round 5 in particular, we called it diversification of revenue streams. So I don't think I can give us a judgment. I think it has been positive. All the feedback we get has been positive. Mainly, we do have some cynics out there, but that's okay. This is the news industry. There are some cynics there. What I find really interesting is going to be actually the output of rounds 4 and 5, where there's been a focus on the monetization and the business model and the diversification of revenue streams. Because for me personally, that's the biggest challenge of the industry right now. And it's great to see all that creativity coming out of that. The honest problem of the DNI fund is that, you know, between, you know, awarding and a product getting out there, it takes time.
Yep.
It takes time, right? And it takes time to get products out there. And we are finally now seeing a number of products out there from round 1, which was, you know, 18 months, 2 years ago. So it's another sign that these things do take time to do. But what we've been trying to do under the DNI fund is stimulate innovation. And I'm, you know, touch wood, I'm pretty happy with how it's going so far. But again, tell me how we're graded. And the other point is, tell me what we should be doing, right? Because we need that feedback. Because we don't have all the answers. We're trying to just develop this as we go.
So if you won't give yourself a grade, let's turn it into more sort of performance management talk. What constructive criticism have you had through the DNI process, or what learning points, horrible HR but maybe more techie words, have you had out? I.e., 3 years ago, what do you wish that you had known that you now know from the feedback you've got?
Well, I can actually answer your previous question just as you put it in performance review. For the Google people in the room, we've just had perf, which is how we do our performance review. I gave myself a solid orange. So there's green, orange, and red, and I gave myself a solid orange. So there you go. That's how I've graded myself. But I think if I could go back 3 years ago to the beginning, what would I do differently? I think on the product, under D&I, we had 3 pillars: product, training and research, and innovation. I think of those 3 pillars, I think the training and research one, I think has probably worked the best. It's, our News Lab team are a fantastic team, and I'm not just saying that because most of them are in the front row. They really do superb stuff. For anybody who went to the master classes, that's the team that do that. I'm very proud of our support of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism and the Digital News Report, which I think is excellent. I think in terms of the product and the Innovation Fund, on the product stuff, I think we've done some good things, we just haven't done them fast enough. And I think that's been the biggest criticism both we've heard about it, that it just hasn't been fast enough. And I think it's absolutely fair criticism. I also understand why certain things haven't gone as fast as they have. But I don't know any product development process where someone goes, hey, you know what, that went just as fast as it should have, right? Or, but can we do more? Yes. Should we do more? Yes. Should we be faster on that product stuff? Yes. And, the spirit is there to try and do that. I think on the Innovation Fund, I really wish we could go back in time, because I think, and I'll put this on myself, I think I made a few mistakes in the beginning about just the publicity element of it. I was very worried in the beginning that people would think this was just kind of some kind of PR stunt, or Google was trying to kind of hijack Google's IP, people's IP. And so what we said was, we're going to keep the projects confidential. If you were the project owner, it's confidential. You tell us if you want to publicize it. And the feedback that we got was, what are you talking about? We absolutely want to publicize it, right? And then the feedback we were getting from the industry was like, we want to know more about this. And so I think the biggest criticism would be in 2 areas. One is we just didn't do enough on knowledge sharing, and we're trying to correct that. And Ludo, who runs the team, who's fantastic, is working with people about just trying to increase the knowledge sharing. And the other element is the community side of it. Right? I think we, through D&I, both the product, training, and research, and innovation, we kind of created a community where people were coming together and wanting to know more. And honestly, we had no idea this was going to happen. And so therefore, we didn't resource it in a way to bring people together. So that was actually the thing that one of the other things people were asking. Hey, it's great you have like once a year you have something, but we want to know more, we want to come together. And so we slowly started doing kind of regional D&I things, country level ones. And then the thing that's made me kind of the most proud is that we had somebody come up and say, I'd like to kind of create my own little community around local, right? And I was like, this is a brilliant idea. We need to do more on local. And he goes, have you heard of like TED and TEDx? I don't know if you know that, but TEDx is like unofficial meetups under the kind of TED umbrella. And he was like, can I create D&IX? And I'm like, that's a brilliant idea. Damn it, why didn't we think about that before? And so they created, I think we had to change, I think we actually asked the lawyers whether we could use that, and they got upset about X, so we called it something else. But what I thought was great is that this was the community coming together, bringing people together, and we're just trying to enable it. And so we may give them a room. That's about the Google involvement there. Mm-hmm. But if I could go back in time, I would have tried to do much more on the community side and much more on the knowledge sharing side.
You mentioned the IP issue, and that actually people wanted to speak about it. But there's also been an issue, hasn't there, around sort of, we're coming up with our ideas, and Google could quite happily sort of grab it and run on with it and kind of steal our idea, but under their IP. Has that become an issue at all?
Not at all, because we were very conscious of that perception in the beginning. So we put lots of things in place to make sure that never happened. So number one, Ludo and his team actually sign different contracts that say they cannot give information to Google. The fund council is very separate. Nobody from product on the Google side is involved there. So we actually haven't had that happen. We've had the opposite happen, which is we've had the project folks want to talk to our Google people, mm-hmm. right? And sometimes we want Google people who want to talk to the project folks, and we have to actually say to the Google people, hold on. We go to the project person and go, would you like to, right? And invariably they say yes, and then we go, okay, now you can have the conversation, because we wanted to make sure that we would never be perceived as doing that. So I think because we put all these checks and balances in place, that hasn't happened, and nor has the perception of that happened.
So DNI is in its fifth and final round now. As you say, the products and the projects will be continuing. Oh, there's a sixth?
Yeah, sixth round.
Sorry, there's a sixth.
Yeah.
Okay, but now you're sort of moving in under the umbrella of the Google News Initiative, this bigger piece with your 3 E's, which I don't remember at all, but I just remember it's about quality journalism, money, and tools. But I'm sure you've got a nice way of doing it. Go on.
Yeah, so this is a whole new thing, so let's see if I can remember it. It's, what we're trying to do under G&I is elevate quality journalism, evolve business models, and empower journalists through technology. So those are the 3 E's. Right, did I get it right? Okay.
Simona?
Yeah.
Did you get it right? Yeah. Okay, great.
But those are the kind of goals of the things that we're trying to do, and we're trying to do that through what we call the 3 Ps, which is product, partnerships, and programs. Yeah, it's great, yeah.
What can I say?
Yeah. They had to keep it simple so that I could actually remember it.
So one of the interesting things around the first bit, which one is that? No, not empower, evolve, no, the other one. Elevate, there you go, got it eventually. But essentially quality news sources, right? So for those of you who have read the kind of the proposal of GNI, it particularly talks about in breaking news situations where bad actors can come on scene and have done, particularly through YouTube recently, and spread conspiracy theories or simply falsehoods that are, gain traction because people are looking for information. And Google says, well, we're going to make sure that they're deprioritized because we're going to go for authority over relevance. That's a lot of expectation that you're putting on an algorithm, isn't it?
Well, I think what we try to say there is that we're conscious that in particularly, as you said, in breaking news situations, that it's different from the normal situations, and the bad actors are active, right? And so I think what Google has seen from the beginning days of Google has been, in those days it was pretty much spam, right? People trying to game the algorithm to get clicks and all that kind of stuff. But I think what's happened much more is that these bad actors in those situations come up. And so what we said, and we've been very public about this, is we're trying to do a multi-pronged approach to this because we take it incredibly seriously. Because, as I said, if you start getting crap results, you're going to go to a different search engine, right? That's not hard. So that's why the importance of this issue is central to what we do. And we're doing a multi-pronged approach on that. I mean, one of that, the thing that you're talking about is about the changes we made in the search algorithm in breaking news. And if you think about the dimensions of relevance versus authoritativeness, right? What we're trying to do in the breaking news situations is make sure that authoritativeness is indexed properly, right? Because sometimes what happens in those breaking news situations is those search query, and also in the conspiracy theory situation, the search query is one that we may not have seen before, right? And so people are able to game that much more. And that's why authoritativeness needs to be balanced there. Because that's the dynamic that you do. And we have updated our search quality guidelines and our rater guidelines. It's a 160-page document, which is open for anybody to see. You can Google or Bing it to find out where it is. But we've also been doing other elements as well in this whole, what I believe I'm supposed to call misinformation space, right? We've done a lot of work around stopping financially driven stuff. So, closing accounts, shutting down stuff in terms of misrepresentation. But we've also been doing other things, again, through the News Lab team. They're working on, with the ecosystem on fact-checking initiatives, but also work through the First Draft Coalition. And finally, we're doing things in the media literacy space as well, because there is no one solution to this problem. It's a multifaceted problem that needs, a multi-pronged approach to it. So we're trying to do the best that we can. Again, feedback gratefully received if there are things that we're not doing that you think we should be doing.
But on the authority piece, it's an interesting question. There was quite a ding-dong between your boss and Campbell Brown in New York a few weeks ago about whitelisting journalists. Isn't choosing which brand is authoritative really the same sort of thing? Because essentially you're saying, well, we trust the New York Times, but actually in the Parkland shooting, it might have been a small Florida local news service that actually had by far the most authoritative news on that event.
Yeah, and I think this goes to the point about, Google being different, right? Because we have, on some level, a slight advantage, because as a search engine, you are searching for something, right? So if you're searching Parkland shooting, you're giving Google a signal, and then we can work on that. And so we're not picking the New York Times over the Orlando Sentinel with no input. With the Parkland shooting, you would go, okay, well, there is a local element there, and there's that is another one of the signals. Obviously, if you are searching for the New York Times, we're going to take you to the New York Times. You're searching for the Orlando Sentinel, will take you there. So with us, because there is a search, a query, it's dynamic, and we can use that as the main signal to give you the set of results that hopefully will be relevant to your query.
It again takes me back to your morning session about the algo editor. Essentially, you're relying on an algorithm to choose which bits are authoritative and which information is going to come towards you, which might be useful in an immediate breaking news situation, but if we take it away from America and we put it into, the Philippines or into Russia or wherever, it might well be that some of the more authoritative sources are maybe not necessarily the most neutral or balanced.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the point I was trying to make about, from a search engine perspective, because we have a query that allows us to work in a certain way. If you don't have a query, like some kind of feed, then the algorithm is much more complicated and it becomes difficult. And I think, often people say to Google, oh, you should do X or you should do Y. And I think the point that you're trying to make there is that it's hard to do such a thing at scale across the entire globe, because what might make complete sense for Italy may not make sense in Russia or China or Saudi Arabia or Zimbabwe. And so we try to build for everyone and do things at scale, and so that's why we try to do these in the way that we do them, rather than whitelisting a set of news sources.
So we mentioned scale as well this morning, and it seems to me that everyone's hopeful answer to scale is AI. And it seems that everyone wants this magic bullet, or the sort of magic genie of AI to sort out all of our problems, and yet is also utterly terrified of it. You've had some interesting issues around YouTube. There was an interesting New York Times piece calling it the Great Radicalizer, because as you started looking at content, it took you down an ever more extremist and sort of click-hungry path. What conversations are you having internally around how to keep these robots in control and actually make artificial intelligence also have some sort of emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I think we acknowledge straight up that news is different, right? And the recommendation engine that you may have for an educational video, or if you're my 9-year-old daughter, a slime video, or a sports content, is not the appropriate one for news content. And so we're working on a different form of recommendation engine for that. And I think that's again showing that something like AI, going back to what Jessica was saying in the previous panel, there's this kind of binary thinking. It's either going to solve all the problems of the world or it's going to destroy the world. It's going to be one of these two things. And the reality is it's going to be neither of those. But it should be used appropriately, hopefully, to assist and to do better. And I think that's what I see the role of AI in the news ecosystem is about, assisting journalists and the news industry with the things that they want to do.
And in terms of people watching a YouTube video, or in terms of people looking for more information around, what is AI? How are you using it to make sure that you're servicing a variety of sources rather than just increasing these filter bubbles, which might get more clicks, but might not be the healthiest thing for society?
Well, I think that goes back to the understanding that you need a different type of recommendation engine there, right? And I remember when I was at the BBC, we worked on a little widget of, if you read this story, read this story. And the problem at the time was that it was, if I read Liverpool beat Man City, all the stories were Liverpool beat Man City, Liverpool beat Man City, Liverpool beat Man City. Now, I'm a Liverpool fan, so I was happy to read every single one of those. But it wasn't intelligent enough to understand, if you read this one story, you may not want to read 600 different versions of that, right? And so I think it shows that news is a complex area, and you need to approach these things in a different way, and that's the approach that we're taking. And just as a small aside, that's why, the engineers who've worked on Google News are talking with the engineers who work on YouTube. One of the senior engineers is a senior engineer on YouTube as well. So it goes back to that point I was saying earlier about the experience and the knowledge base about sharing that, which is very important.
So the other two pillars of the Google News Initiative are money and tools. Sorry, the other two E's, but essentially money and tools. So we've heard a lot about Google for subscriptions over the last couple of weeks, but I'm interested. We were chatting before about how a lot of the ideas come out of conversations that you're having with journalists, and you mentioned rounds 4 and 5 of D&I being specifically about revenue. How do you think we're doing on thinking about making money? I mean, subscriptions is not going to be a magic bullet, not least, Reuters doesn't want subscriptions from the web. The Guardian doesn't want it, they want membership. So how are we doing on that?
It's interesting. With round 4, we said we want to focus on monetization. And that's what we said. And I have a feeling that what everybody heard was paywalls. So we got a lot of paywall applications. And that's why, this may sound ridiculous, but that's why for round 5, we said diversification of revenue streams. And I find it interesting that we've actually got about 100 more applications in round 5 than we have in round 4. And so this is a personal view. I think sometimes we get a little sort of, our focus narrows on certain things, that this is going to be the solution, this is subscriptions, it will be the solution, right? And we focus on that slightly too much. And as you said, if you're Reuters, that's not really going to be what you want to do. And yet, I think Reuters still and is, actively looking at how you diversify revenue streams. So I don't think it is about one solution is going to solve all known problems. It's actually going to be a lot of different options, or hopefully a lot of different solutions, and they're going to be different for each different news organization. I think what we're trying to do under GNI is not to say it's this or it's this, but to kind of enable a process and a dialogue, and the outcomes hopefully will take care of themselves.
So I'm looking at the time, it's 5 to 4, so I'm going to ask you one last question and then open it up to the room. Don't worry, I don't know anything about your Orange performance review, but if all of a sudden, I had written this before, if all of a sudden Google didn't work out and you came back to journalism, how would you engage with Google and what would you want?
So I would engage with the Google News Initiative, wouldn't I? Come on, that was too easy.
Well, no, of course, no, but give me details. Give me details. What are the actual things that you would want?
I think seriously, I think it would be based on which, I think I'm based in London, so I'm going to stick with UK examples, right? I think if I was with The Guardian or if I was with the FT, I would be operating in a completely different way, right? And I think that's the point I was trying to make about the different sets of options, which is, I think the first step is to understand yourself, your principles, your strategy, your unique selling points, your culture and your mission, and then figure out all these opportunities. Because I think the reality is, and let's extract this beyond Google for once, right? For the technology companies, they could blanket you with all the things that you could do, right? And it's about picking the right ones that are appropriate to you and to your principles and what you're doing. I think that the one thing that I've learned, if I have learned one thing at a tech company that I think is fundamentally different from a news company, it's the attitude to failure. And I think that, people talk about this a lot, right? It's, fail fast and blah, 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 and never waste a failure, and these are lines I like. But I think that actually a culture of not being afraid to fail is one that will enable more success. And in my time in news, if you failed in something, never spoke of it, let's not talk about that, never makes the CV, that's that. Whereas in the tech culture, it's okay to fail, and actually they understand that failure is part of the innovation process. And I say this when I talk to news organizations, and I think actually my experience has been that you can only do that from the highest level, right? The CEOs of the companies need to not only say that, but they need to enable that and make it effectively something that is okay. And the important part is it's not about failing, that's not what you're trying to do. It's about trying to innovate, knowing that failure is a possibility, but also learning from that and moving forward, right? I was reading an article a while back about you remember when Amazon made the phone that was was it the Fire phone or something like that? You know, and everyone like poo-pooed it, and it was like, you know, everyone was like, oh, this is terrible. They used a lot of those learnings when they built Alexa, right? So, you know, that's where you can learn from failure to build better things. And I think that that's a different cultural approach than I've seen in my time in the news industry.
Excellent. So we're going to open it up for questions. We've got about 20 odd minutes. So just the usual request, please, as you get the microphone, to introduce yourself before you ask the question.
Where are the mics? We got one there.
Where are they? There they are.
Oh, don't let Jarvis ask the first question.
You lose. Jeff Jarvis from CUNY. A guy sitting next to me just showed me that Google lost the right to be forgotten case. Can you understand, or is the...
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I know, it's echoey. Google lost the right to be forgotten case. Guy just showed me.
Okay.
In its original decision, Google kind of finally had to say, okay, and set up this huge structure to do this. Google fought this case. Do you know why it chose to fight this case particularly?
We're fighting a number of cases on this, so which case are you talking about?
This is the British one, right? Yeah.
There's two British ones.
There were one lost in the same decision.
Yeah.
But it lost something, which I personally find disappointing. And I guess, and I know that your policy people have talked about more frontiers of this going on in Europe. Where does this whole, to my mind, issue of preserving the historic record stand? And how much is it worth it for Google to fight on behalf of facts?
Well, I think, as you said, when Right to be Forgotten originally came out, we fought it all the way because of what we believed what it was trying to do. Once it was done, we respect that. And the reality of Right to be Forgotten is that it's trying to balance a few things, right? It's trying to balance people's access to information, also with people's privacy. And so what happens is that each individual Right to be Forgotten case is a unique case. And so we judge each Right to be Forgotten case on its own merits. And therefore we will fight it based on the individual merits. And so we pick the cases because of that. Because I've been up here, I didn't know that we won one, lost one. So I think that also, you know, winning one and losing one shows that these are nuanced judgments, and people are on different sides of that. And sadly, sometimes you have to go to court to be able to figure out where that is, and you build up that base of experience to move forward. I think what I would say that surprises me as a news person is that how uninterested most news organizations are about Right to be Forgotten right now. It's like it was a thing and we're done and we move on. But I think there's been a growth of cases where people are using and this is a personal view, people are using Right to be Forgotten in ways that I don't think the law was intended in the first place, right? And I'm surprised that people aren't doing that more. There was a very interesting, I think it was BuzzFeed did a very interesting piece about how it's created almost a cottage industry in the UK of lawyers, of you getting, you know, let's just say oligarchs coming in, law firms in the UK are then trying to do all these things to clean up the history of some of these oligarchs, right? I don't think that was what the law was intended for. So I think, again, this is a very nuanced and delicate situation. But I think that it needs attention, right? And that's where I would say.
We had a question over on the left before. Yep. Oh.
Hi, I'm Alex Fanta. I'm a journalist covering tech in Berlin. And last year I had a couple of Google-sponsored fellowships, so thank you for that. My question would concern this. So Google gave via DNI 100 million euros so far, I think about 100 million euros to the European publishing industry, and it will give $300 million more to the global publishing industry. And so my question is, does Google want anything in return for that?
So we've given so far 94 million euros, and the 300 million is not going to be in a fund format. It's going to be in multiple different ways. And I think the reason that we're doing that is that originally when we were having the conversations around DNI is the publishers were saying to us, can you help us with innovation? And that was where the innovation fund came from. Because the feedback that we were getting from the industry is that innovation is something that everybody talks about, but it's very hard to quantify, it's very hard to incentivize, and it's very hard to fund, and that's why we created the fund in that way. I think what we're trying to get out of the overall process under GNI is we're very conscious that we operate within an ecosystem. And the news element in the news ecosystem is a very important one. So we want to play our role properly in trying to stimulate innovation and sustainability in that ecosystem. Because a healthy ecosystem for news, we think, from a principles perspective, is very important, but also from a business perspective, right? You know, there's a part of our business that, you know, we make money when publishers make money because one of our businesses is an ad tech supplier. Right? There's a lot of talk about, you know, Google's role in the digital advertising market, and the reality is, in the digital advertising market that's relevant for publishers, which is display, we're just a supplier, and so we only make money when publishers make money. So a healthier ecosystem is also, from a financial perspective, good for Google.
We had another question just there.
Hi, Jim Louderback from VidCon. Wow, that's loud. Can you point to a couple specific things that YouTube is doing to make it a better place for news and journalism, or maybe a couple things they should be doing to make it a better place?
So I think in terms of the things that they have been doing, I talked about the changes around the recommendation engine. They're also, in a number of countries, we're creating a breaking news shelf. We're trying to create information around news stories as well. So you may have seen some of that stuff around links to Wikipedia. So again, this is all a development to try to make it a healthier element. The other things that we've tried to do on the kind of functional side as well is we have a program called YouTube Player for Publishers. So we're working with news organizations for them to use the YouTube Player on their own site and on YouTube. So again, that will increase the kind of quality content in YouTube and simplify things for publishers in video on their side. It was one of the things that came out of the product pillar of DNI. So I would kind of throw it back to you, and I'd be happy to talk afterwards if you've got other ideas of what YouTube should be doing, because we want the feedback on what we think we should be doing. We can't promise we'll do everything, but I think I'm of the view that the more ideas you get, the better, right?
Any other questions before we wrap up? Speak now. No? In that case, Madhav, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you for being grilled.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane.